크리스마스캐럴을 읽어보겠습니다. Chapter 1 Molly's Ghost. Molly and Scrooge has been business partner for many years. Now, Jacob Molly was dead, and there was no doubt about it. Scrooge was the only friend at his funeral, but he wasn't sad about Molly's death. He had inherited Molly's apartment and most of his money. And when the funeral was over, Scrooge returned to his work. Ebenezer Scrooge was mean and cold-hearted. He had a pointed nose, red-rimmed eyes, and thin blue lips. His voice was harsh and grating. Nothing could warm his cold heart. Nothing could warm his cold heart, and no one ever asked him for help. Scrooge didn't care. It gave him more time for making money, but he never spent any of it. 7 years later, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge was busy in his office. It was freezing cold, and at 3 o'clock it was a little dark and foggy outside. His clerk worked in a small cold room next to Scrooge's office. Bob Cratchit was only allowed to keep a small fire. So, to keep warm, he was wearing all the clothes that he owned. From time to time, he held his finger over his candle to defrost down. But poor Bob continued to shiver with cold. Suddenly, Scrooge's nephew Fred rushed into the office. His face was bright red, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. "Merry Christmas to you, Uncle!" he shouted. "Bob, Hamburg Christmas," said Scrooge. "Hamburg? Surely you don't mean that, Uncle?" "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas indeed. You're too poor to be merry. You see, Christmas is a time for spending too much money on things you don't need. For me, Christmas is time for kindness and charity," said Fred. "I don't have much money, but it makes me happy to share the little I have with those who have even less. Come and share our Christmas dinner tomorrow, Uncle." "No, celebrate Christmas if you must, but leave me alone." "A Merry Christmas to you, Uncle," shouted Fred, "and to your Bob Cratchit." Then he left the office to hurry home. Just then, 2 gentlemen arrived to see Scrooge. They took off their hats and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Molly's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen. Scrooge nodded. "Are you Mr. Scrooge or Mrs. Molly?" "Molly died 7 years ago to the day," growled Scrooge. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Scrooge," continued the gentleman. "We are collecting money to provide the poor with extra food and fuel. It's Christmas, and they suffer greatly at this time." Scrooge frowned and shook his head. "And there are no prison or workhouse for them?" "Are there no prison or workhouse for them? They don't provide enough for anyone to survive. So, Mr. Scrooge, how much can you give?" "Nothing," said Scrooge. "I don't celebrate Christmas. The poor must go to workhouse." "Many would rather die than go there," said the gentleman. "Well, let them die," said Scrooge. "Then there will be more for those who are left." "Good afternoon, gentlemen." There will be more for those who are left. The 2 gentlemen shook their hands and left. They knew they would get money from Scrooge. Meanwhile, the night became darker, foggier, and colder. But the shop windows were bright lit, and and decorated with holly and berry. In the street, some men and boys were warming their hands around the charcoal burner. One young boy began to sing Christmaskcarol outside Scrooge's door, but Scrooge chased him away. Closing time arrived. Scrooge called Bob Cratchit. "I suppose you will want tomorrow off to work?" "Yes, please, sir," said Bob quietly. "Christmas is only once a year." "All right," said Scrooge, "but be here early the next morning." After Bob left, Scrooge locked his office and hurried home to work on his ledger. A large brass knocker hung on the front door of his gloomy apartment. As Scrooge put his key in the lock, he jumped with fright. Scrooge saw Molly's face in the knocker. Its ghostly spectacles were pushed up onto his forehead. The eyes were wide open and motionless, and its hair stood on end. Scrooge rushed inside. He lit his candle and looked back at the knocker. But Molly's face had disappeared. He closed the door with a bang. But Ebenezer Scrooge wasn't easily frightened. He locked the door and went upstairs. After he made sure he was alone, he double-locked his bedroom door. He put on his dressing gown, slipper, and nightcap. He heated his soup onto the stove and sat down by the fire to eat it. When Scrooge had finished his soup, he sat back in his chair. It was then that he saw one old servant bell begin to swing. Gradually, the ringing got louder and louder until it deafened him. Scrooge was filled with fear and dread. Suddenly, the bell stopped. From below, he could hear her heavy chains being dragged across the cellar floor. From below, he could hear heavy chain. Oh.